At this point, I would like to introduce our two speakers from Studio Petrichor. We have Shawn Maestretti, who's the principal of Studio Petrichor, and he's the creator of this talk series on regenerative landscapes. He's a designer, plantsman, licensed landscape architect, a certified arborist, licensed landscape contractor, and educator. And his unique background combines extensive horticulture experience, strong composition skills, and environmentally sensible practices with a wide palette of visually and texturally interesting California-friendly plants, breathing new life and a sense of place in every garden. This is something we need to really think about, these types of things. Leigh Adams is a consultant, educator, eco-sensitive designer, and horticultural interpreter at Studio Petrichor and Metabolic Studio. She's trained many county agencies in regenerative practices, as well as conducting hands-on workshops with local schools and professional groups. Her love of collaboration and education infuse all aspects of her work, leaving participants with a profound sense of empowered accomplishments. One of her most important legacies is the Crescenta farm at the LA County Arboretum. There we go. So much to talk about. So, Shawn, I'm going to turn this over to you, and good luck.
I'd say accomplishments and accomplices.
Yes, definite accomplices.
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and share our screen and get started. So give me a sec. How's that? Can everybody see?
Yes.
All right, here we go. So in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks of reciprocity as the foundation of the Potawatomi culture. She describes the wisdom that was acquired by observing and interacting with nature for thousands of years. It would be safe to assume that this happened on every continent around the world as well. As developing humans, we learn how to survive and then thrive in concert with nature for millennia. Hold on, it's not going forward.
Click on it once.
Yes, I'll just do that. Okay, all right, somewhere along the lines, our clever, innovative minds found ways to make it easier to function, live, and thrive through inventions. We might say that this is where our ego minds left or separated from our eco minds.
Yeah, Shawn, is there a box on top of your screen?
Up here?
Yeah, can you grab that and move it out of the way?
I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah, just see if you can.
Can you move this? Oh my gosh, you can move it. Oh,
yeah, it was blocking your screen. There you go.
Thank you.
Wow, thanks. Our thought, okay, I'm going to start that over. We might say that this is where our ego minds separated from our eco minds. Our thought processes evolved, which means our practices evolved. Unfortunately, separating our awareness from ourselves and a holistic view of living systems. Past records have illustrated how many civilizations have collapsed due to their overuse and over-extraction of their resources, the rise of agriculture, and the destruction of their soil. Our processes and practices that we're about to share with you are our approach and how we choose to function in our work and in our lives. This knowledge is based on global indigenous wisdom and practices, the failures of collapsed cultures, our research and observations of living in concert with nature. And our mission moving forward is to be co-creators with nature and to inspire you to do the same for our children's future.
We both agree that our exposure to nature in our formative years has influenced our work today. As it turns out, if you are to become friends with plants, you are to become familiar with their counterparts, soil, carbon, water, and biodiversity. All things are connected, and this is what supports community above and below ground. Let's shift the energy around this talk. Rather than focus on a crisis, Let's focus on solutions. And in order to find meaningful solutions, we must ask the right questions. We'd like to thank these organizations without which this would not be possible. Kiss the Ground, LA Sanitation, Climate Reality Project, Pasadena Water and Power, the Gabrielino Nation of Indigenous People, and the LA County Arboretum. So today's current problem, a path and process to solutions, weaving it all together, our personal experiences, our actions, and we invite you to join us. How do we design for transition to a new world?
Before we can answer that, let's look at the facts. Humans have been living in a degenerative, destructive relationship with nature. Sustainability is a great effort, but it isn't nearly enough. If we want to thrive alongside with nature in harmony, we must start thinking and acting regeneratively.
You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Thank you, Bucky. So here's our first question for you. How does your landscape function? Imagine your garden, or choose a garden in your community, a front yard, a pathway, a hill strip, something that you encounter regularly. Even if you don't care about it, pretend that you do. You might live in a multi-residential urban complex community, a single family home community, or even on a homestead farm. Ask yourself, how does this landscape function? Is it teeming with life, or is it struggling to get by? Is it on a life support system? Is it being watered regularly to maintain its beauty? Think about it. Now compare that to what you would see in nature. One of those walks up our beloved hills here locally. Put yourself on a walk through an oak woodland or a hike in a remote mountain range. Ask yourself, how does a landscape function in nature? More specifically, how does an ecosystem function in nature? There's an important distinction between landscapes we create and control versus ones that rely on their natural, complementary, reinforcing, regenerative systems. Now come back to your own garden. Can we acknowledge that we have enforced our ideas of what a garden should be and how it should perform just for us? We're going to illustrate how we can be co-creators rather than enforcers. What we've realized is landscape design has been all about landscape control. We were born with obligations as well as privileges to care for and interact with the beings on this planet, not to tame them into submission. Our next question is, do plants, insects, animals, even watersheds adhere to geopolitical or property line boundaries? Can we consider that ownership is an illusion or a construct, just like control? To be more specific about our relationship to the land, at Studio Petrichor, we focus on supporting a reciprocal relationship with nature, and we weave this knowledge into our design work and our education.
So the global climate crisis is irrefutable. We are experiencing accelerated entropy due to warming climate, and it's what's being called a positive feedback loop. Now, I want to acknowledge the awkwardness of this concept because positive actually means worse. The climate feedback loops are processes that can either amplify or diminish the effects of climate forcings. For example, wildfires. More fire, more CO2. More heat, more fire, more CO2.
This is one of our favorite photos that pretty much sums up the current state of affairs. It's laughable because it's true. It's also sad because it's true. Apathy is a problem. The problems are so overwhelming. It's easy to shut down, to numb ourselves, to go golfing and hope it passes, right? This also includes hoping for the best, but not taking affirmative action. Real action equals hope. What do we want to get out of this mess?
Sorry.
Or do we want to get out of this mess, or at least rise to the challenge and make an effort? We have to be in action. Real action means real hope.
So the average American has a 16-ton per year carbon footprint. But in order to have a chance of staying below 2 degrees warming, the average American needs to have a footprint under 2 tons per year. And that's an 87.5 change in behavior. We must shift our behaviors and our current ways of thinking. It's time to live differently. It's time to live regeneratively. There's so many ways we can do this in our homes and in our communities. We're going to share with you how to reconnect with the land and help Mother Nature to regenerate. And this is an opportunity to reimagine how we as a community, or municipality, or landscape designers, or home gardeners can do things in our work, in our lives, and yes, even in our backyard. Like, can we support better, more regenerative feedback loops? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
But let's break this down. Degenerative ultimately represents the destruction, the depletion, the reduction, and killing of our planet. Sustainability is essentially cyclical. It's surviving and maintaining. Regenerative is thriving, renewing, it's recreation, it's abundance. Think about it. What is true sustainability? It isn't food imported from 3 states over. It isn't water piped from miles away, and it certainly isn't sending your recyclables to a factory that just burns more energy. True sustainability is a result of a regenerative model, which is making use of what we have. True sustainability is in our own 2 hands, and it's in our own backyard and community. Creating regenerative systems is not simply a technical, economic, ecological, or social shift. It has to go hand in hand with an underlying shift in the way we think about ourselves, our relationships with each other, and with life as a whole. And this is a really easy graphic to understand, and it comes down to how we choose to act. Where I always ask, our team when we're designing, where on this sliding scale do we want to be on this? And use this as a gauge. And we're going to go through some examples of how we do that, but we have to start somewhere. And we're going to start from the beginning with the soil, because our lives depend on healthy living soil. But what is soil? Well, it's 50% solid and 50% air, or void space, to allow for air and water to pass through. And there's that little bit of soil organic matter, which is this distinction between healthy soil, living soil, and dirt. 95% of all land-based organisms exist in our topsoil. Microbial activity also drives the process of aggregation, which enhances soil structural stability, aeration, infiltration, and water holding capacity. All living things above and below ground benefit when the plant microbridge is functioning effectively. A plant root is very similar to our lower intestines. A plant acquires nutrients from the outside and the other from the inside. Having a healthy microbiome is essential to health for both plants and animals. Now, roots, most people think that roots just take, and that's not true. They also give. This is an image of mycorrhizal fungi, our hero, our spirit animal.
Woohoo!
The hyphae of a mycorrhizal fungi is only a single cell wide, and they penetrate the root cell wall to facilitate nutrient exchanges between the fungi and the roots. The fungus receives sugars from the plant, and in exchange, the plant receives certain nutrients, water, protection from pathogens, as well as information. Although ecologically influential, soil fungi are really fragile, and the use of fungicides, pesticides, inorganic fertilizers, and other physical factors can reduce or eliminate them. This is a photo of mycorrhizal fungi taking advantage of a cardboard only 3 weeks after a lasagna mulching workshop. This is one of our many efforts to support an underground community. So for those of you who haven't heard of desertification, it's a global epidemic. We have lost 1/3 of our arable land in the past 40 years. Desertification is a term that applies to the man-made destruction of the underlying soil resource to such a degree that it can no longer support life. Phase one is the disruption of the local water cycle through urbanization, sprawl, agriculture. Our drainage systems were designed to move that water off the land.
It's okay, we can get some from Colorado.
Phase two increases the heat of the ground and the air through impermeable surfaces such as concrete, asphalt, roofs, and yes, bare, hardened ground. Phase three is topsoil erosion. Without plants to keep the soil cool or their roots to help with infiltration, soil dries out and the microbiome is lost. Desertification is not only in and around a desert, it can occur anywhere. Desertification is not the result of drought, although droughts can exacerbate the process. It is a man-made phenomenon. And this is from Alan Savory. It's not drought that causes bare ground, it's bare ground that causes droughts. To sum this section up, microbes rule the world. A healthy soil microbiome equals a healthy planet. Next, we create an alliance. Let's get really comfy with carbon. So this is an image that represents how finite our resources are. This is an image of our atmosphere taken from the International Space Station. You could drive an automobile at normal interstate highway speed straight up into the air and you'd reach the top of this space in about 5 to 10 minutes where you couldn't breathe anymore. That's the thinness of this space, and it happens to be the exact space that we're using as an open sewer for our the gaseous waste of our civilization. We are currently spewing 152 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into this thin shell every 24 hours. Isn't that interesting? COVID death rates are in the US are 8% higher in countries with fine particle air pollution. Even elevated CO2s have resulted in the increase of diseases and powdery mildew and other types of plant diseases in crops. A real-world study of CO2 in soybeans, aphids and Japanese beetles were drawn to more plants with raised elevated CO2 conditions. Beetles that fed on high CO2 leaves lived longer and laid more eggs, and high CO2 levels are lowered the plant's natural defenses, making them virtually helpless against the plant-eating insects. So if there's anything we want you to remember after tonight, it is where there's carbon in the soil, there's water. Where there's water in the soil, there's life. And without soil life, soil food web, we are lost. Carbon is the most basic essential building block of life. Each human has at least as many microorganism cells as human cells. Scientists tell us that those microorganisms were the beginning of life on Earth, and they are the key to our health, our gardens, and our food, and they connect us to the soil. But plants are so awesome that they are literally built from thin air. They are solar-powered carbohydrate-making machines that move carbon from the air and put it into the ground where it belongs. Without carbon and oxygen in the soil, along with microbes, fungi, plant roots, all working together, carbon is depleted from our soils. And water will run off, carrying topsoil, pollution, pesticides, and more, and this ends up poisoning our waterways and our water supplies. The movement of carbon from the atmosphere to soil via green plants represents the most powerful tool we have at our disposal for the restoration of soil function and the reduction of atmospheric CO2. In the upper left corner, a microscopic image of a plant stomata. This is the function is to absorb CO2 and release oxygen. I like to call it the CO2 monster. Carbon sequestration in soil and vegetation has the technical potential to reduce atmospheric CO2 levels by 156 ppm this century. So that's what plants can do, part of what plants can do. We're going to talk a little bit about what dead plants can do.
So did anyone have a windstorm this past weekend and some trees coming down? And we grieved them. But sometimes, all too often, we'll allow them to be hauled away, ground up, and that carbon dissipating back into the atmosphere rather rapidly. Not that we don't like mulch, we love it. But we like to use those logs and those fallen leaves in something called hugel culture. Hugel means mound in German, so it's mound culture. We start by digging and excavating, which gives us some on-site soil to use. You got that? Okay. Then we layer that with cardboard. Cardboard is our invitation to mycorrhizal fungi. They are attracted to the cardboard. They love the air pockets in it. They love the pre-digested cellulose. And most of all, they love the glue because they metabolize it as sugar. Then we use some of that soil we removed and add green waste. We use compostable discards and compromised woods. Compostable discards, yes, pizza boxes, random
Takeout containers,
and those
Yeah.
boxes that come from Amazon or
old pants.
anything organic, we use it. And then we put some smaller logs. Why are we putting those smaller logs on the bottom? So we can get the large logs up on top. Then we add more green waste and soil, and then the really big logs. Now it seems backwards, doesn't it? But hugels have a magical quality. Besides those logs having capillary action to absorb water, they also have thermal mass. The fresher and newer they are, the more thermal mass they have. Just like when you have a cold glass of water on a warm day, moisture condenses on the outside of that glass. Well, in the evening, when those logs have a temperature, they're cooler than the air temperature, it forces moisture to condense from its gaseous state into its liquid state. And when that occurs, those logs absorb it. Here comes the good news. The plants use capillary action to draw the moisture out of those logs. They create their own soil from the bark and the wood. And we get all kinds of passive and active water harvesting. We love this solution. So here's our entire hugel culture, and we're going to show you some that we built in Pasadena with Pasadena Water and Power and a neighborhood collaborative. There go the Christmas tree. Now, if you would like to see those hugels planted and thriving, they are at Sheldon Reservoir on Coniston and Arroyo. And it's open to the public. You can walk around and enjoy.
In Pasadena.
I'm sorry, did I not say Pasadena? Done with Pasadena Water and Power. Great allies. Oh, on the screen now is a property in La Cañada that historically had a water flooding issue. We created a native garden with a riparian capture in it. So now all that excess water that was flooding the house is now moved through the garden and created a habitat. For this homeowner, she's lived there for over 20 years. Once she put in this garden was the first time that she saw a rabbit in her garden. This is the backyard here at Studio Petrichor. Hugels built-in workshops, thriving. There's our food-producing hugel. And guess what? You can actually build a hugel on a driveway or a blacktop. We did this at Waldorf School, and it's growing native plants so the children can learn about the butterflies, bees, and other inhabitants that are native to our area that don't live on asphalt. There are other ways we can return carbon to the soil: mulching, composting, lasagna mulching, biochar, rainwater harvesting as a feedback loop, and plant community-based design. That's Shawn's specialty. So we want to, thirdly, honor water and invite it to stay. What are major water repositories? Ice, snow, oceans, underground aquifers, lakes, rivers, forests, yes, forests, and man-made reservoirs. Tree cover, that's a hot topic right now, especially in the city of Los Angeles. This may look a little complicated, but this map shows the causes of deforestation around the world. Of course, younger trees and forests are the most effective way to pull down CO2 back out of the atmosphere. But we face issues like this. Knowing what we know about global tree loss, you better believe we are gravely concerned about protecting our urban tree canopies from certain utility companies taking advantage of foothill communities such as ours. We have to stand up for our existing urban forests and be planting for succession. At Studio Petrichor, every project we work on, we optimize our water resources. We can do this a number of ways. Most exciting to us, we want to know, do you know that 1 inch of rain that falls on 1,000 square foot roof creates up to 625 gallons of water that can be captured, stored, or infiltrated? Ooh, this is what we do right here. That's rainwater coming off the roof. There's rainwater coming off the neighbor's roof, their garage. All that water is carried through this garden. The daylight's right there in the bioswale. That bioswale is a repository of fungi, and it leans up against a hugel that absorbs all that moisture. Ooh, look at those turkey tails. And there's the overflow so that we never have an issue. Every year, a system like this can take in increasing amounts of moisture and move it laterally, as well as infiltrate vertically.
And there's some of these logs that we just gave away that people are in this call, on this call, have taken to their garden, and now we've inoculated their gardens with different types of mushrooms.
So what do you think? How many 55-gallon rain barrels will it take to capture 620 gallons of rain? Oh yeah. Oh no. But if you have the resources, this is a cistern in the backyard of one of our clients. It captures water off her roof. It makes water available for her garden. It's available to the fire department in case of fire. This is an exciting option. And to the left is harvesting water off the street in one of our Pasadena homes. It takes in water through that swale. Again, that hugel is there acting as a large living sponge. And those systems thrive and flourish over many years.
I just added this one.
Oh, good. This is one of our favorite things we're currently doing. Curb cuts.
Technically, we didn't do this.
No, technically we didn't do this. But this, I've had this in my own backyard for over 10 years now. I take in water, I run it through my garden. It filters through logs and living plants and waters my native plant garden and my fruit trees. And now it's doing that for one of our clients. And it's so beautiful. It's fun to watch the neighbors come and stand in front of this property. And you're seeing it and it's not finished. Finished, it is absolutely exquisite. Oh, and there is that rain garden that you saw working. We can design rain gardens and bioswales to look however we want them, but they have to be optimized for maximum infiltration and absorption. And that's done through plants and carbon. This practice has so much potential and doesn't need to conform to any set of standards. Site conditions dictate what you can do, but personality is everything. Every water harvesting project that we do has a character of its own. So other things we do to optimize our water usage, we plant native climate appropriate plants. We utilize gray water systems. We're dedicated to permeable surfaces. We support regenerative agriculture, and we are mad for fungi. Now, we have research showing that fungal spores in the atmosphere contribute to cloud formation. This is from Scientific American. Mushrooms, which spring up like tulips after a good soaking themselves, make spores that act as rain seeds, which makes the rain that makes more mushrooms, our own climate forcing. If changes in climate reduce rainfall in ecosystems, the resulting inhibition of fungal growth and spore release may exacerbate the frequency of droughts through the unexpected feedback loop. And fourthly, once we have the holy trinity of soil, water, and carbon working together, know that the interconnected web of life is unraveling at an unfathomable speed, and the majority of the planet are not treating this as a crisis. We now risk losing up to 50% of all land-based species in this century. It is a dire situation, as each of you know. Rusty patch bumblebees, if you see them, you are lucky. All wildlife need 4 things to survive: food, water, cover, and places to raise their young. Here's a map of Los Angeles ecotopes. There are 27 altogether and 17 within the area of Los Angeles. Designed to support biodiversity and habitat, native plants are the first line of defense in preventing habitat loss. Doug Tallamy again, insects are the link between plants and all creatures higher on the food chain. Doug Tallamy wrote Bringing Nature Home, and he pointed out that the continental US lost a staggering 150 million acres of habitat and farmland to urban sprawl. And that trend isn't slowing. The modern obsession with highly manicured, perfect lawns alone has created a green monoculture carpet across the country that covers over 40 million acres. That home was one of our clients in Pasadena. The human-dominated landscape no longer supports functioning ecosystems, and the remaining isolated natural areas are not large enough to support wildlife. So this is where we can all step in as a community. In this project in Pasadena is one of our COVID-compliant workshops. People come, join in, learn how to do this, and take it back to their own yard and neighborhood. This was taken on January 29th. It is looking so amazing. This garden is beautiful. The oak tree is thriving. There are birds and butterflies and native bees. It's a delight. The plants and wildflowers are emerging and soaking up the recent rains, and it is filled with pollinators. Here's a peek into the back garden as well. Every nook and cranny, exposed log or branch, and hugelkultur berm is an opportunity for habitat enhancement. And here's another Pasadena project we just completed. You saw this earlier. This is taking water off the curb and infiltrating, and all through this garden. This is what it looked like before, and it took water. This is what it looks like now, and it takes very limited water. Our clients have invested in a legacy that transcends beauty. They were courageous, really courageous in accepting the challenge and supporting unfamiliar practices. We can't wait to show you these gardens in person so you can see, hear, and sense the abundance. No need for recorded bird song. So designing for biodiversity. Plants are the basis of everything. They are creating all of the food that drives all of the food webs, with very few exceptions. They are the key to enhancing biodiversity, and it starts with indigenous plants. Our only hope is if we come together, all peoples, all sizes, all cultures.
The feedback loop begins with community. We are living under the myth of separation and the myth of individualism and the myth of human supremacy. These myths have been going on for some time. Separation is a story, and it is not true. We are not separate from the earth. We are a singular ecosystem, undivided. Everything is interconnected, and we aim to reconnect what's been lost. So I imagine our current lifestyle model looking something like a bowl with cracks in it. But let's just imagine this is our current landscape model. We waste and squander our most precious resource, water. We waste energy. We continuously pollute our air, water, and soils with byproducts. We import and create more waste. And of course, time is valuable as well. Communities are woven from the foundation and interdependence of soil, carbon, water, and biodiversity. And we are attempting to recreate and support a regenerative model that isn't depleted, but grows as we grow. But we have to start with soil. But when there's carbon in the soil, there's water. And when there's water in the soil, biodiversity is supported, spanning all. And all of biodiversity creates community, and it's community on our part, which is the feedback loop. What if soil, carbon, water, biodiversity were all given the same rights that humans have? At minimum, the right to exist and thrive. We understand that the cycles of life indefinitely rely on death in order to live. In order to survive, something must die, and we must return and pass on the gifts that we've been giving. So here's an example of a negative or better feedback loop. Here we are again with that awkwardness. Just remember that negative feedback loop actually is better. Pretend it's opposite day. So in this one, soil absorbs more water when carbon is present. We support living soil, which supports plant life, which supports biodiversity, which supports the carbon cascade, and so on. So the only way we will change the world is by changing ourselves and our day-to-day actions and behaviors. We keep talking about carbon emissions like they're our biggest problem, but that would be an incomplete statement. Human behavior is also our biggest problem. Human behavior drives excessive greenhouse gas emissions. Global action is required to curb these problems. What we are illustrating is that a series of powerful solutions also lie in our hands and in our gardens and in our communities. And it's time to be proactive on both ends. We've got to stop our emissions. And we've also got to heal some bits. So it's time to be proactive and less reactive. At Studio Petrichor, we focus on compromise with intent for both parties, our clients and with nature. Here's an example of a lovely front garden design template as an example. Imagine if all residential garden designs designed with functioning regenerative systems, practices, and principles like this, where we are harvesting water from our roof. And if we have room for a cistern, great, because you never know if you're going to need that water for an emergency, or if you have a vegetable garden or something like that. There's a lot of reasons why you might incorporate a cistern. Once that cistern overflows and that water's flowing, because it will, we move it into the landscape. And we also play with landforms, as we mentioned hugelkultur berms earlier. We look at a plant community-based approach and increase the permeable ground plane as much as possible to turn our gardens into sponges. And just imagine landscapes functioning as living ecosystems supported by this inspiring relationship. And like this one, wrapping its arms around you like a big hug. We call that the embrace. This garden is a receptacle. It's capturing, inviting, and abundant because we're nurturing living soil, harvesting water as much rainfall as we can, using landforms and hugelkultur to increase infiltration and biodiversity, breaking up surfaces to increase permeability wherever possible, using a plant community approach to support a carbon cascade in the soil, increase infiltration and enhance biodiversity as well, which in turn will further the cycles of life for all non-human and human beings for generations. Now let's get into this garden. You see the rain garden to the left and the berm to the right. Let's add a hugelkultur berm. And when it rains, the rain garden fills up and begins to infiltrate, and that water moves both gravitationally and laterally. And our hugel soaks up that water. And I mean, it does, because we tested it this time. We pulled a log out and it was full of water like a sponge. And this was at least 2 weeks after the recent rain. And, you know, this garden is pulling carbon and pollutants out of the air and remediating it in the soil. But what else is this garden doing? It's cooling the environment. And this is from 1959 to 1988. It's a NASA depiction of temperatures on the globe up until 1988. And this is what it looks like now. At least 224 locations around the world have set all-time record heat highs. So we went out to the Arboretum on a 98-degree day at 3 in the afternoon with this handy infrared thermometer. Thank you. And did some comparisons. And there was about a 50-degree average of 40 to 50-degree difference between hardscape surfaces such as decomposed granite, asphalt, concrete, and native plants like this giant wild rye, which was pretty cool.
And it's unirrigated.
Unirrigated. So here's infrared evidence that plants cool the environment. Again, hot, bare soil, asphalt, concrete, all contribute to heat island, but cool covered soil contributes to cloud formation. So here we have some case study solutions, both residential and in the public space. This is a project that is going to be on this year's, for the third time in a row, the Theodore Payne Native Garden Tour. If you haven't heard of that, I highly recommend checking it out, because it is a great way to get inspiration on starting a native garden for yourself. But as soon as I walked onto this property and met these guys and saw this pink and purple house, I knew that they had to be my clients. And we did some amazing work together. We really wanted to honor this home, which is a 1938 colonial revival, with a garden design that speaks to that era and its history, but also plant it with pretty much all native plants. So we incorporated those, you know, historical alleys and axial pathways, and parterres, and we really gave it that colonial revival feeling, you know, in the most wild sense, by adding hugelkultur berms and harvesting water and a plant community-based design. On every project, we calculate how much water we can harvest on any surface and keep it on site. Probably the most exciting part of what we do is ways to reimagine how we can repurpose materials and not send them to the dump, which then increases our carbon footprint. But all of these materials that you see, we repurposed on site through creative saw cutting. And again, here's our hugelkultur berm. We reimagined what that patio could look like with that hideous old flagstone pathway, salvaged brick. And this was in its second year. This was last year. And that table is made from the liquid amber trees that had to come down from the front because they were dying of xylella. The concrete you saw in the front, which was used as a parking space, is now the fountain. And it is teeming with life. The entire garden is teeming with life. I do hope you can check out the garden tour this year. If not, you can go to the Theodore Payne, the Native Garden Tour website and see some videos on it. But if not, we hope to see you there. And then the project in La Cañada that we brought up earlier. Again, here's some hugelkultur berms with the rain garden. And what's really exciting about this was another opportunity to harvest more water, as mentioned with these cisterns, but we had to cut through concrete, and she happened to have a whole bunch of repurposed salvaged brick. So we were able to repurpose that salvaged brick, create a beautiful design on the driveway. And
Permeable.
Permeable, yeah. And then all of that concrete that we cut, we repurposed and built this in the back. And this was an area of the property that she said, I don't care what you do back here because I'm never going to go back there. And now she's always back there because it looks that pretty.
She moved her office, she moved her kitchen table out of the breakfast nook and moved her desk there so she can look out into the backyard that she never cared about before. Okay, and now we're going to look at the Crescent Farm at the LA County Arboretum. This was the flagship for wildflowering LA 8 years ago. It's 7/8 of an acre, and it was a lawn for 80 years. One thing we don't talk about with lawns is that they destroy soil structure. After drawing all the nutrients out over and over, they only live on life support, sprinklers and nitrogen, and that destroys soil structure. So this was a flat canvas to begin with. And then we got some hugel culture going, and then some lasagna mulching, and then a swale or two, and an infiltration basin. That infiltration basin just happens to be on top of caliche, our California limestone. And while I dug it out with a pickaxe, I couldn't get all the way through the caliche. We all know we can't have standing water without a pump in it, and there's no electricity in this place. So I had to come up with a solution. I lay cardboard in there. I put mulch on top of it. I put rocks on top of that to make it look natural. The rains came and the water went in. What happened? Mycorrhizal fungi were in that cardboard and in that soil. And when moisture got in there, they flourished. They use their hyphae, the growing tips, and exude an acid that can break down rock. They broke through the rock to get to trees so they can trade sugar. They trade moisture for sugars, but that made the limestone permeable. So water does not stay in that infiltration basin. It does what it's named for. It infiltrates. Thank you, mycorrhizae. This is a meadow and a hugel culture berm. That berm at this point, it was over 6 feet tall. It is now down to about 4 feet after 8 years. You can't see it because it is entirely covered with unirrigated native plants. It's been so successful that the Xerces Foundation now supports that hugel and the wildlife preserve that it represents. And a meadow. A blooming meadow. Now remember, this soil was stripped. It was compacted, it was flat, there was nothing in it. And what can you do? Well, you can spread wildflower seeds and a bit of mulch. And when you do, you get this flourishing ecosystem that makes people and insects come there by the thousands. The birds come after the insects, and it changes month after month. Sometimes you can find the native bees, the longhorn bees, sleeping. Those are all male bees, I might point out. The female bees, no, they're not working, they're underground. But the males, when they're sleeping like this, you can actually pet them. I love a male you can pet.
So this is new.
Ooh, it's exciting.
And I suppose we can talk about it. We are starting to reimagine streetscapes and medians, and this is a median project that we did a schematic design for to demonstrate water harvesting and hugel culture and native plants and et cetera, everything we've been talking about. And we just wanted to give you a sneak peek how we're reimagining these barren spaces, because it looks worse than you see it in this photo now, but after a year and after building and planting and letting it establish, you know, this is the 5-year plan, but our goal here is to really increase the urban forest in this area and return it to what it was without having to rely on so much input, so much water. And so we reimagine climate ready plants, climate change ready plants and trees. And this is just a rendering we did to illustrate the both above and below ground relationships when we incorporate carbon into the soil in whatever form possible. And notice that we have incorporated the gophers in there because I believe that they're unsung heroes. They may be annoying, but let me tell you, they are ecological engineers. And they don't really mess with my native plants. They may make little mounds here and there, and we may have conversations, but I do not kick them out. What's really exciting is about this is how we analyze this, and this is just a first draft, but we're going to be sharing some more images as we're writing a book and our process. So the one thing we've learned over the past more than 3 years is that when we teach, we learn. And sharing this knowledge and these practices is the key to strengthening our connection to each other and the environment. And we have seen a profound ripple effect occurring beyond our own community. And everything right now can feel really big and overwhelming, and rightly so. But in truth, the biggest impacts are the smallest ones. And every little change we make, starting at home and in our backyards, has a profound ripple effect. And these are examples of some of our hands-on workshops, our COVID-safe workshops, where we build hugelkultur. And this is a recent collaboration with LA Compost, where we wanted to demonstrate water harvesting in an area that's been flooding and eroding for a long time at one of their sites in Griffith Park. And it's one of our board members, Sanjay, catching a log and helping us to build hugelkultur berms. We're currently collaborating with Pasadena Water and Power to demonstrate these practices in our designs and bringing communities together. And we have recently formed our board for the nonprofit Pollyanna, which is to educate and empower communities as agents of change to honor and protect natural living systems. And we wanted to let you know that because there's many opportunities to collaborate. So please get on our newsletter, because the Studio Petrichor newsletter includes everything Pollyanna. And we have a lot of events that we're planning for 2022. We've done so many, and there's so much opportunity to do so much more. So moving forward, soil is our matrix, carbon is the gift, water is life, biodiversity is the key, and community is the feedback loop. It's time to be proactive, not reactive. And question, why not challenge designers, technologists, policymakers, planning professionals to evaluate their proposed actions on their positive, life-sustaining, restorative, and regenerative potential? Ask yourself, are we designing product gardens or process gardens? Can we acknowledge our illusion of control and actually co-create with nature? Can we reimagine a new world, building reciprocal relationships with nature? Reciprocity, gratitude, and respect for the land is our way into a thriving future. And I'd like to close with a quote from environmental activist and author Joanna Macy. Until we can grieve for our planet, we cannot love it. Grieving is a sign of spiritual health, but it is not enough to grieve for our lost landscapes. We have to put our hands in the earth to make ourselves whole again. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world is giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. Please find your connection to nature and ask yourself, are you gardening like your life depends on it? Thank you.
Okay, are we ready for questions?
Sure.
Okay, we've got lots. Let me remind everybody, I'll stop the share. Let me remind everybody to use the Q&A for your questions. Questions in the chat are very hard to find and to keep track of. So if you've put them there, please type them again in the Q&A so we can find you. We have a number of questions about the size of a hugelkultur. So, you know, what would be like the smallest dimensions that we practice? I mean, could you do it on a parking strip? Could you, you know, if you have a small space, you know, like you're in a, in a little tiny space, or does it need a scale? Do you?
So here's what this is a tricky one, because, hugelkultur represents, or it literally means a mound, a hill, mound culture. And what we have found in the most exciting ways is the simple act of leaving a log or two in the landscape acts as a nurse log and will help support something. Whether you bury it in the ground, make a berm out of it, create a grid out of the logs, whatever you're doing, it's some type of carbon culture.
Sequester that carbon. But to answer that question directly, one of our secret successes is using hugelkultur inside planter boxes. Number one, you use half as much soil because you have used logs and green waste. So you're essentially essentially the hugelkultur process is composting in place. So when we do it inside a planter box, we need to plan that every couple of years we're going to add more soil or redo the hugel. But currently we have some that have been going for 3 years, are thriving in the harshest of conditions. Everything we do is site specific, so it's hard to say, but we have many people who have hugels in parkways, low hugels, so they're not, there's ingress and egress. But personally, I like to go big, and that hugel at the Arboretum is one of the most successful ones that we've done. So there's all kinds of, it's a scale like everything. And what your site can support may be different than what someone else's site can support.
Interesting. Now you mentioned farming. Well, would that go to a commercial farm scale? Is that something that might happen in the future? Is that a possibility, or is that more like for personal property?
Anybody familiar with the Urban Homestead in Pasadena, who has a very successful hugel? They've just put in 2 more hugels because they are having such success with them on their property in Pasadena. Scaling it up to farming, most farming is done at such a large scale that hugelkultur wouldn't be as appropriate. However, burying those logs in the ground would have it wouldn't harvest as much water, but it would help return carbon to the soil and absorb water so it doesn't go through the soil, and then allow the plants to draw that out.
I'd like to, I like to think of, hedgerows, because, you see hedgerows around farms, windbreaks and things like that, that hugelkultur berms maybe not support the windbreaks, but the collateral advantage from the hugelkultur and planting native pollinator plants to increase pollinator activity around the outside of the farm would absolutely be beneficial, and you wouldn't have to use as much water on a native hugelkultur berm.
Shawn just mentioned collateral advantage, which is one of our favorite effects of a hugel. We tend to think, oh, we put the hugel right here in this spot and we can grow in it, and this is where the benefit is. However, every tree that has roots can sense that hugel and has mycorrhizae going back and forth from the hugel to the tree, and the tree roots end up under the hugel and thriving. We call that effect collateral advantage. And it's exciting when you see it happen.
Interesting. Now, a lot of the planting you're talking about new planting, but we have a specific question. If there's a parkway that already has existing trees, can you still put the hugelkultur in there next to the trees, and that'll work? Or
I'm going to put on my arborist hat. And so everything we talk about, everything we do is site specific and condition specific. So it depends on the health of the tree, what type of tree. You certainly don't want to dig, parkways. I just want to backtrack here. Parkways are a thin strip of land. And so, a tree's roots are supposed to be radial, but in this case, they're very linear, except for when they can go under a sidewalk, or it's doubtful that they actually cross the street. So you would be impacting the very sensitive surface feeder roots. And I would be very mindful of that. You could try and build something light on top, but I would just get a consultation. I don't want to answer that.
Don't want to damage anyone's trees. Everything is site specific.
Yeah. If there's a young tree,
yeah,
and there's an opportunity a little bit further away, yeah, go for it. But if it's definitely under the tree canopy or the drip line of the tree, you want to be very mindful of that.
Ooh, and a hugel on an incline, a slow incline below a tree can give incredible benefits to that tree.
So we have a question from Sylvia, who she's involved with the last 11 years reforesting Dukmasian Park, which is the upper part of Glendale, into the it's in the Crescenta area. It used to be a winery, just to throw that in, but she's wondering, can you plant oaks on top? They've had, when they're doing the reforesting, when they plant the trees, a lot of them are dying, and so they're looking for ways to plant and keep something alive, and knowing that these aren't going to be watered. I'm throwing stuff.
Yeah, part of the problem is that you've already got hydrophobic soil, compacted soil, impacted soil. They take an oak tree that's been in a cushy potted environment in a nursery, being watered, every so often, and left in the desert to die. And so your question specifically about planting on top of a hugelkultur berm, I would not do that. I have done that, and I've noticed that it's just not as stable for the tree. At the base, at the bottom, right next to a new tree, absolutely. I tend to lean towards planting, lower shrubs at the brow, mid-height, or to the top of the hugel, just because for stability reasons, because there's sometimes air pockets, and it's not like solid ground, so it's kind of like that in between, but over time it will settle. I would keep the tree planting, especially if it's going to be something like an oak, towards the bottom, and support the root zone with some kind of carbon culture. We
also find that with hugels, the first thing you want to do is plant sunflowers. Our native sunflowers are perfect, but those long fibrous roots catalyze the hugel and begin to move moisture throughout it where it may be uneven. And if the turn to soil is fantastic. When we open up a hugel and pull out a log, like the wet ones that we tested last week, we find the roots of plants have gone between the bark and the wood, and they're breaking down the bark where the nutrients are, and they're soaking the moisture from the wood, absorbing the moisture from the wood, and they're actually creating the exact soil they want.
Some are working their way into the actual sapwood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there were so many nutrients in your yard.
Okay, we have several questions, and there's a little bit of repeat in this, and I'll take this for all of them. They want to know about the workshops you mentioned. How do they, when it's the next one, how do they sign up for that? And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, we are in the process of planning our 2022 calendar. And here's the thing, as our construction projects move forward, there will be hugelkultur workshops. If you have a garden and you want to make a donation to our nonprofit and have Leigh and I come out and do a hugelkultur workshop, we can, of course, talk first to make sure it's appropriate for your site, but there is some way we could do that with you. But typically we do it on projects that we're already in design or construction with. And so that's when we plan those workshops. We just recently had a few up here in Altadena, but we're on a little sabbatical right now, trying to breathe. But there will be more, and please just get on the newsletter, follow us on Instagram, and you will see workshops coming up. We're going to have some really good ones.
Excellent. And just to repeat, there's a couple of questions about slopes. So, you know, the examples you have are mostly on flat land. Can they be on a hillside, and how steep of a hillside could they be on?
Site specific, condition specific. I mean, we've built hugels at the bottom of a slope. It depends on the steepness of the slope.
But have you ever seen an oak fall on a slope?
Yeah.
And then what happens to that wood is that there's more growth around it because of the nutrient value in that. And in many cases, it can actually slow down the erosion of the slope.
Yeah.
But it's all site specific.
So you could email us a photo, and I could try and answer that way, or, you know, we're for hire for consultations, of course.
So, and I put your information in the chat, so it should be there for everybody. And I'll put another link to all the links a little bit. People are asking, you know, if they're going to do this, let's say they have a small yard, say 1,000 square feet. I'm just guessing in a number, but that seems like a small yard. You know, what's the cost? You know, what are people looking at for this? How does it compare with regular landscaping, you know, financially?
Are you referring to just a hugelkultur berm or the whole kit and caboodle?
That's a good question. They weren't specific in any of
Yeah, I mean, so look, you could build a hugel with your community. The wood should be free from a tree trimmer. The mulch is free. You might need some extra soil. You're going to have to displace some soil. Cardboard's free. It's just a matter of doing it and trying it. And here's the thing: try it. Screw up. We're always experimenting and learning from it. And I mean, when we do our workshops, it's like putting together a mosaic. We just do it, put it together. We're thoughtful about it. You know, the chef in me wants that lasagna to be nice and tight and perfect, right? And the outcome is good, but it's taken a lot of practice to get there. I can't really speak to the cost of designing a water harvesting, you know, garden without, you know, context. So that might be better for a phone call.
Okay. So if they're more interested, they can contact you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and this is a very intriguing question to me. You got Pasadena Water and Power to the table. You know, it's been our experience with working with utilities that this is not. How did you manage that? And
they came to us.
Oh, wow.
I mean, look,
we have a track record.
Yeah, we have one of the people working there was watching her, and then I got up in front of the city council and had my little rant, and, you know, got waved down by someone from the water department, and all of a sudden both of them came together. It was like, oh, so will you do a presentation? We did a presentation like this, and
we've done a series of hugels.
They're very progressive. Let's just put it this way: they're moving forward. It's moving forward.
And by the way, Pasadena Department of Water, the outreach person, Ursula Schmidt, is willing to talk to the city council in any of your cities to talk about the benefits of this kind of work and the unexpected community response and support that they experience from doing this. So as we continue working with them, Ursula has offered to do that. So first find out who's the mover and shaker on your city council, and then connect them.
Okay. Maybe you can send that to me and that contact.
Happy to do that.
And I know people that I could mention that to, and I think I think earlier I know at least one person from the Sustainability Commission was watching this, was logged in earlier. I don't know if they're still here. So, possibly, I can pass that along if they can contact you directly. We have a question about fire. It's a pretty involved question. There's somebody in the Santa Monica Mountains, and they have when they work with the fire department wants every scrap of everything cleared off the land.
Bury it.
And if you bury it, which is the hugelkultur, that solves that problem.
So here's the thing. For you, check out the Chaparral Institute. Follow Rick Halsey. We're very aligned in that, like the fire department calls it fuel, and it's really nature. And the point is defend your home. Make sure that you have an ability to defend your home. Be mindful about how you place things, right around your home. I believe that I can speak for you. We believe that, selling people no mulch is absolutely ridiculous. It's just about, mulch helps to suppress the weeds that come up that are the flashy fuel, the real fuels when those grasses, take off. So I feel for you. I really do. And but you might reach out to Rick Halsey of the Chaparral Institute. We love his approach.
One of the great things is that he was a firefighter for many, many years before he started the Chaparral Institute.
Yeah.
And if you follow us or get on our newsletter, he is going to be speaking for us
this year.
A Zoom.
Yeah, he's going to do a presentation for us this year.
And he's wonderful.
Excellent. So maybe you can if you send that contact information to us, because I'm going to send the document out to everybody after the link to the document.
I'm going to find his website.
You don't have to put it in right now, just after the program.
Okay.
And I'll send the link to the document out to all the participants once we have the recording link, so people can do that again. A lot of people are interested in Ursula's email and the Chaparral Institute. So I know the answer to this because somebody's answering it to city or county programs to support water capture installations. And I happen to know that Glendale, across from the senior center, has trial plots for water capture on Luis between Harvard and Colorado. But do you know about any more or of those types of things?
Water LA or the River Project was doing some great work, and I hope that they get back up, because she put a lot. Melanie put a lot of work into everything that she did, and all of the curb cut demonstrations that they were doing, and water harvesting demonstrations were, just what this city needs. And we need more. We need more bold guerrilla warfare thinkers like them and us to, break the rules so that the rules change.
When I made curb cuts in my backyard, it was against the law, and I was told I would be fined. And that individual was the head of public works for LA County, and I've now trained 37 of his agencies in how to harvest water.
Oh, great!
You can turn it around.
That is great. And if you don't have trees, so we have a question. Can somebody just bury Amazon boxes in the yard? Will that have I
have lasagna mulch. I mean, you can, if you have an area that you need to suppress weeds, I would. That's Amazon boxes are great for lasagna mulching, but you could tear it up and put it in your compost bin. It will break down. I mean,
and makes great soil.
Yeah, I've left it in the driveway, not on soil, and it started to break down, and fungi still penetrated it. I mean, it will break down.
Excellent. So I just a couple more questions, and then we'll let you go. What happens to the over time with the hugelkultur? I think you alluded to this a little bit. you showed some pictures of the trees breaking down. Somebody said they heard that takes oxygen from the air. Is that true? Is it how long does it take? Has there been studies of the life cycle of hugelkultur?
Yeah, you can find a lot of information on hugelkultur on the internet, and I wouldn't believe 99% of it. It turns out that all dogma is every time we go, okay, well, they said don't do this, let's try it and see what happens. We've learned something new and exciting.
Why hugelkultur doesn't work in dry climates, ... And I want to say, for you.
It works for us.
I mean, wait for the book. We'll see. We'll see if we fail. I mean, we're just going to keep going until we just realize that it was crap. But I don't think that's going to happen.
The size of a hugel is significant. The 20 years is the most that one lasts. They break down, but that's also done with hardwood, and that may not be what people are using. So I've been privileged to do them with some very large logs, as well as some that scrap wood from, we have one at Metabolic Studio on the LA River that was made with old clothes, cardboard boxes, scrap lumber, and it hosts the most beautiful native garden you've ever seen, unwatered and glorious.
Okay. Well, we'd like to thank you.
I'm going to show you this wonderful graphic right here, and I'm going to try and find this and send it to you. You can share it, all the benefits of dead wood in the garden.
Excellent.
And they ask that you share it. It's open source.
I do have one question, and I know David wasn't able to get to it. I noticed you had some what looked like black plastic containers in the hugel garden. Is that true? And what was the purpose of those?
Placeholders.
Placeholders?
Yeah, so let's say I want to plant a 15-gallon tree in my hugel.
But there's 20 people in this workshop, and I don't want them to damage this tree.
Yeah, so we put a 15-gallon container in there. So when it's time to come back and plant it, we just pop the container out, rough up the tree roots, plant it.
Wow, what a great idea.
You got some stuff.
Innovation, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was really invigorating. And, this late in the evening, it's hard to invigorate my mind.
Oh, thank you. That's good.
Yeah.
I was just like reading this, doing this presentation. I'm like, oh my God, we've been doing this iterations after iterations of the same presentation for so many years. And we're just now working on the next evolution of this talk, which is going to, for the most part, completely change its course. We hope that we're going to be taking it to the next TED level. So when that's ready, we'll reach out if you want to.
No, you come back. We'd love to host
part two.
Sounds good.
All right. So we both want to thank you so much for the presentation and all the information, and I hope that even some of our viewers go out and start looking at their garden where they could start putting hugelkultur in. And
so I just want to talk about that for just a quick second. People love the idea of the hugelkultur, but really that's just one of the optimizers. It's part of the and. So it's harvesting the water, getting carbon back in the soil, building up the soil, doing the land forming, supporting with native plants. It really is a whole systems approach to it. So the hugelkultur is one great way to deal with green waste and repurpose and create a neat feature. But if you can harvest water at the same time, it just adds that extra kick to it, which supports a more resilient garden. And we've seen it working. I've been able to turn my front native garden irrigation off, and it won't water for 1 month, and the garden will be just fine. And
good to hear.
Ursula at PWP was like, her jaw dropped when I told her that. Oh no, yeah, I just set an alarm in my calendar to do a deep soak once a month. When the irrigation controller has been telling us you can only do that, you can do this, this many times a week. We've been trained to water 1 to 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah.
What if we train our brains to water
Once a month.
once a month?
Yes, excellent.
All right.
So lots of food for thought for everybody.
Good, good.
And we wish you all the best. And thank you so much.
And David, I want to thank you for
Thank
doing
you,
all
David.
of the moderating and behind the scenes controls, because you do a great job at that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.